Well, as you might have noticed, we're a little bit shorthanded at the moment, but we are going to begin the meeting. We'll begin with the presentations, establish a quorum when we're able to do that, and then deal with other formalities of voting on the vote-only calendar and items as they come up. So we'll begin this morning with the cap-and-trade update. If those who are making presentations from DOF, LAO, ARB, et cetera, could step forward. I understand it was a little tough getting in the building today, yes. But glad to see that you all made it.
Fortunately, our shots are all up to date.
I see that the Strategic Growth Council is not here yet. Hopefully, by the time you finish your presentations, they will be.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Last year, the legislature appropriated over $900 million of cap-and-trade auction proceeds for a broad portfolio of programs designed to reduce GHG emissions through supporting sustainable communities, clean transportation, energy efficiency, clean energy, natural resources, and waste diversion programs. In addition, the 2014 budget permanently allocated 60% of future auction proceeds to public transit, affordable housing, sustainable communities, and high-speed rail. The governor's budget proposes to continue the existing portfolio of investments included in the 2014 cap-and-trade expenditure plan. In addition to the $30 million already appropriated in the emergency drought package for water use efficiency projects, the budget proposes $992 million to continue existing cap-and-trade programs in 15-16, including 60% of the expenditures dedicated to public transit, affordable housing, sustainable communities, and high-speed rail. The governor's budget released in January reflects the expenditure of approximately $1 billion of auction proceeds in 2015-16. Since that time, the first cap-and-trade quarterly auction, including transportation fuels, was held in February. Consequently, the administration will be adjusting the proposed cap-and-trade expenditure plan as part of the May revision. Now, Chairman Mary Nichols would like to make a few comments.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Before you begin, Ms. Nichols, I think we'll take roll. Since we've got 4 people here, we'll strike while the iron is hot and do the vote-only calendar.
Bloom.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Obernolte.
Here.
Patterson. Williams.
Here.
Let's move on to the vote-only calendar. My understanding is that one or more members have questions about Issue 4, and there's also a request to vote separately on Issue 6. So if we could have a motion on the remaining items exclusive of Issue 4 and Issue 6, that would be great.
Move vote only with the exclusion of Issue 4 and Issue 6.
Second.
Let's vote.
Bloom.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Obernolte.
Aye.
Patterson. Williams.
Aye.
Thank
you. So Issue 4.
Do you want to have the discussion later, or why don't we have the discussion when CEC comes in?
Would it be preferable if we had a decision on this, a discussion on this item when the CEC is here? On number 4. If you have questions that they'd be able to answer, or?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, then we'll hold that item until later. And we'll vote now on Issue 6.
Move vote only Issue number 6.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Bloom.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Obernolte.
No.
Patterson. Williams.
Aye.
That's out.
Great. Ms. Nichols.
Thank you very much.
Patience.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss how investments of cap-and-trade auction proceeds are furthering our progress in meeting the state's climate goals. The California Cap and Trade Program is one of the state's core strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. It's complementing a mix of source-specific regulations, including our vehicle emission standards, low carbon fuel standard, and the renewable portfolio standard. The carbon price established by this program is shifting investment decisions towards cleaner technologies and providing public funding that accelerates the development and deployment of green infrastructure and advanced technology. The Cap and Trade Program includes an auction component, and the state's portion of the proceeds from these auctions is being invested across a suite of programs, including transportation, energy, natural resources, and waste. Just last year, the legislature and governor appropriated over $900 million of these proceeds to 12 state agencies. These agencies have been building new programs or retooling existing programs to put a new focus on greenhouse gas reductions. All of these agencies, including the Air Resources Board, are putting the proceeds of the cap and trade auctions to work in California with investments that both reduce greenhouse gases and provide unprecedented benefits to all residents of the state, particularly to our most disadvantaged communities. Just for one example, the Air Board's low-carbon transportation program is providing rebates for the most advanced zero or near-zero emission vehicles to residents in 57 of the state's 58 counties who are taking advantage of these investments. The agriculture and natural resources investments are going to reach deep into rural areas of our state as well. As you know, SB 535 requires that at least 25% of the funds from this program will be invested in projects that benefit disadvantaged communities, and the state agencies administering these funds are working to ensure that the state exceeds that requirement. From weatherization and affordable housing programs for low-income residents, urban forestry, and expanded transit options using zero-emission buses, the state's programs for disadvantaged communities will not only cut air pollution, but also deliver other economic and quality of life benefits. To assist in implementing these diverse climate investments, ARB is developing guidance for the 12 agencies that have received auction proceeds. Together, we are administering over 40 programs and sub-programs and hundreds of different types of projects. ARB released interim guidance to establish consistent expectations for the expenditure records required by SB 1018 and to maximize the benefits of investments to disadvantaged communities. ARB is incorporating these interim policies into comprehensive funding guidelines that will include requirements for quantification, tracking, and reporting. Staff is working closely with the other administering agencies to develop methods to quantify greenhouse gas reductions as well as other benefits from these investments and to establish requirements for tracking and reporting so that the legislature and the public will be able to see the results of these investments. ARB will seek public feedback on the draft guidelines in late spring, and it will come before the board in July for adoption. Over the next year and a half, ARB will develop an online project tracking system with an interactive mapping tool. Each agency will provide its project data so the public can see what projects are funded, where those projects are located within the state, and the associated benefits. ARB recently completed a report on the status of auction proceed investments by all agencies, which was transmitted by the Department of Finance to the legislature on March 20th. Highlights of that report include the fact that as of January 31st, agencies have allocated over $370 million to individual projects. This subset of investments alone will reduce an estimated 4.6 million metric tons of greenhouse gases over the project lifetimes. Over 37% of the funds allocated so far are for projects located within disadvantaged communities as defined by OEHA, the CalEPA tool that implements our policies on designation of disadvantaged communities, and over 60% of these funds will benefit disadvantaged communities. There is obviously significant interest in these funds. Programs with competitive solicitations have been oversubscribed on average by 500%. This includes the waste diversion and agricultural energy efficiency programs that are designed to cut methane, a potent, short-lived climate pollutant. Over the rest of this fiscal year, the amount of funding program for specific projects and the resulting benefits are expected to increase dramatically. The proposed budget and drought bills will continue or increase the level of investment in these programs. Meanwhile, as we are working diligently to assure that the funds that have already been appropriated are being spent in the most useful ways possible, we are also updating the 3-year investment plan that points ahead to how future auction proceeds will be utilized. The Department of Finance submitted the first 3-year auction proceeds investment plan in 2013 pursuant to AB 1532, and that plan identified the priority investment areas to help achieve greenhouse gas reductions and yield co-benefits. Under AB 1532, each annual budget proposal must be consistent with the investment plan. The administration has begun updating the 3-year investment plan, and we're planning a series of public workshops across the state to hear ideas from residents, organizations, and businesses. And then this will come back to the board as a draft in November to solicit formal public comment, and the final plan will be submitted with the governor's proposed budget in January, this coming January. We expect and welcome legislative involvement throughout this process. As Governor Brown noted in his State of the State address, cutting petroleum use by 50%, increasing renewable energy generation to 50%, doubling the energy savings in existing buildings by 2030, and further reducing short-lived climate pollutants, as well as increasing long-term carbon sequestration in our natural and working lands, are all key elements in California's long-term strategy to fight climate change and meet federal air quality standards. The new investment plan will focus on some of the major sources of these pollutants, including transportation, energy, and the natural resources sector, with an eye towards supporting our climate objectives. So in closing, we're really excited that these programs, which are critical to meeting the state's near and long-term climate goals, are moving forward and are supporting California's clean energy economy. We look forward to further updates as the state continues to administer auctions on a quarterly basis. Thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. I'll have a question for you in a couple of minutes, but does LAO want to proceed?
Yes, thank you. Brian Brown, Legislative Analyst's Office. Just a couple of comments specific to the revenue estimates in the governor's budget. As Mr. Almy noted, the governor's budget assumed there will be $1 billion in revenues in 15-16. Our office took a closer look at that number to try to get a sense for if that was a reasonable estimate or not. We looked at a couple of different possibilities based on the number of allowances that will be sold at upcoming auctions, as well as the price. And if you look on page 15 of your agenda, there's a table that shows a couple of different scenarios. Under each of them, we think that under all likelihoods, the amount of revenue that's going to come in will be substantially higher than what's currently assumed in the governor's budget. Certainly acknowledge Mr. Almy's comment that the May revise will revisit that number. But if there are higher revenues available, this is really important for the legislature for a couple of reasons. First is to point out that any revenues over and above what's assumed in the governor's budget in 15-16, 60% of that will be is already under current law continuously appropriated to certain programs like affordable housing and sustainable communities, high-speed rail, and a couple others. And so by our moderate revenue estimate, which is the middle column under the LAO scenarios of that table, and we think the most likely scenario, those programs would actually receive more than double what's currently assumed in the governor's budget. And it's just important for the committee to be aware of that and make sure that's still consistent with your legislative priorities. But in addition, there will any additional revenue that comes in the current year over and above what's been assumed, as well as 40% of the additional revenue in the budget year is available to the legislature to appropriate as you see fit. And so you'll want to think a little bit about what your priorities are, whether that's, and you have different options. So that could be further expansion of some of the programs that you've currently approved. It could be new programs. It could also be that you want to hold on to some of that funding for future years. There are different trade-offs with each of these approaches. Certainly to the extent that you can get this money out the door, it can help the state achieve some of the state's climate change goals sooner. But one of the challenges we have, and one of the reasons I bring up the possibility of holding on to some of that funding, is that right now we don't have a lot of great data for how well these programs are working. Just because it's early, the programs are just getting out the door, the money's just getting out of the door, and we don't know what all the outcomes are yet. So it's hard to know exactly where to make your most effective investments. So with that in mind, I just wanted to kind of give the committee a couple of notes about some things you might consider if you do decide to spend some of this additional revenue that we think will probably come in. The first is one, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but when we think about how the cap and trade system works, to the extent that you spend some of this money on industries in the cap sector, it may not actually reduce overall emissions. And that's because you have the cap system that sets the total amount of emissions that can be produced and the number of allowances, therefore, that are available. So the extent that you spend money to reduce emissions in one covered sector, that just frees up emissions, essentially, to be purchased by other sectors while still meeting the cap, but not necessarily reducing beyond what the cap would otherwise provide. So that's one thing just to think about. But with that in mind, there are some strategies you can think about and how to spend this money that will still help you reduce emissions. One is spending in the uncapped sector. You don't have that trade-off problem by spending in the uncapped sector like forestry and agriculture. You can also think about, are there opportunities to address market failures? So are there certain areas of the economy where even with a market system, there may still be reasons to think that certain actors aren't acting, even with the price of carbon included in the purchase of energy and other products, that there may be reasons to think that certain market actors might not make the most efficient decisions, and so spending in those areas could actually drive more reductions than would otherwise occur. And you can also think about prioritizing some of the funding towards other legislative goals that you've identified in prior legislation, such as meeting disadvantaged community needs, such as air pollution goals. The one risk to consider there is, of course, there's a lot of legal uncertainty about how this money can be spent. And so certainly you'd want to consult with counsel about, to the extent that you put more emphasis on some of those other priorities and less emphasis on reducing GHG emissions, does that create any sort of a nexus concern? So those are just some areas of consideration for the committee.
Thank you. Welcome, sir. Your timing is impeccable. You arrived just in the nick of time for your presentation.
Thank you. The Affordable Housing Sustainable Community Program within the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funding has a goal of reducing greenhouse gases, primary overriding consideration, but also is targeting affordable housing and disadvantaged communities. We feel that the literature guiding transportation land use nexus and the ability of low-income households to significantly reduce VMT when provided affordable housing near transit stations is a solid body of literature and one that we are relying on to guide our investments in that area. The Notice of funds available went out in January. We have received 147 applications for funding. Of that 147, we have invited 54 to proceed to full applications based on they're meeting a minimum set of criteria, and they're having a very significant financial leveraging, which we believe will extend the state's greenhouse gas reduction per dollar quite substantially. The average, excuse me, the average leverage for programs that were invited to full application is over 5 to 1. So our ability to use the state's dollars in a highly effective manner is before us. I think as we move into the final selection among those 54 programs, approximately $250 million in requests for $120 million available, we will have an average leverage that goes even higher than that. So we feel like we're really positioned to have a substantial return on investment in this program. The geographic spread of the program is significant also. We took lessons from prior transit-oriented development programs that ended up with rather limited geographic distributions and created a system that allowed for scales of all sizes to be effective in the program. And therefore, excuse me, we've reached 22 counties, and I might note 40 assembly districts in the invited final round. So we're very pleased with that. Not all areas performed equally well in getting leverage subscriptions. We're going to work with jurisdictions that had difficulties in that area for future rounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's move to questions. And I'm sorry you didn't introduce yourself, and
I'm sorry. I'm Mike McCoy, the Director of the Strategic Growth Council.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. It's good to have you here. On the topic of the affordable housing dollars, the amount allocated in the budget is $120 million. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you expect to leverage that 5 to 1. I'm trying to get a sense of how many units we can expect to be built and what you think the timeline for completion of those projects might be, because as you know, there's a housing crisis throughout the state, and this is a relatively small amount of money to address that crisis, but any additional housing at this point is going to be welcome.
Certainly, and that is a very important concern, and especially in our major urban areas where we have lower wage jobs but not lower wage housing, and that certainly is driving a lot of our excess VMT. We have about 3,350 units that are in the invited pool. Our expectation is that we might have somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 units when we get down to the awards in late June. We have been very careful to establish criteria that require these proposals moving into the invited phase to have all levels of clearance required for the beginning of construction, and that includes all city permits, all environmental review past the stage of legal appeal, and financial assurances from all of the parties that are parties to the funding of the program. So it'll just be a matter of how quickly can we get these under contract. We're working with the Department of Housing and Community Development that has a great deal of experience in this area, so we expect that to occur rapidly.
So am I correct that the actual number of units that you expect from this money is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000?
That's right.
Just putting that in context, when you consider both affordable and market rate housing, there's an estimated shortfall of about 1 million units in the state of California right now. So I'm just raising that because this is an issue that I'm rapidly becoming more and more passionate about, and I want to take every opportunity to underscore just how deep the crisis is. It's affecting everyone from really at every income level, but the closer one is to poverty or being in poverty, the higher the percentage of net income goes to housing, and the higher the housing price goes for people, then quality of life is, even if we're raising people's incomes, quality of life is tending to diminish because all of that money is being spent or absorbed by increasing housing costs. So I won't make any more speeches, but a very important issue for all of us that we're fortunate has an environmental component to it because we can address it at least in small part with cap and trade funds as we are. What are the kinds of mechanisms that the Strategic Growth Council is using to evaluate the grants in terms of their greenhouse gas reduction?
The primary tools that we're using to do that are a model called Cal-EE-Mod, which was developed originally by the Air Resources Board and then later taken over by CAPCOA, who has done an excellent job in keeping this model refreshed and up to date with new data and making it responsive to recent findings in the academic literature. There's another RFP they have out on the street now to do the next round of updates. We'll all benefit from that when that occurs. And then we're using the what's called the CMAQ guidance. It's Congestion Management Air Quality Guidance, which comes out of the Federal Highway Administration. I think I have that right, Mary, yeah. And that guidance is used for assessing things that are hard to model, like walk and bike trips, which transportation models often don't account for with a high degree of accuracy. The federal government has come out with alternative calculation methods for that, and we will use those. These are all based on the density of housing, the density of jobs, the availability of transit, the networks of walking and biking facilities that are available, and these are all calculated into a mix that estimates how many vehicle miles traveled will be reduced based on a set of conditions that we hope to create in a variety of communities.
Thank you. Now, the one BCP that we have is for the Strategic Growth Council, so if you could add a couple of comments about that, just
yes,
some level of detail.
I think this is a very interesting program in the sense that it's an interagency program. I think we have a lot of experience with funding single agencies to do single programs. Here we are bringing a close alliance together between all of the Strategic Growth Council's agencies. So we bring to bear on the project health and human services, which these communities also need and which we need to be aware of in our design process. We bring certainly the California State Transportation Agency into the mix, along with Housing and Community Development and the Natural Resources Agency, all trying to balance these investments so that they maximize benefit in addition to greenhouse gas reductions. That has some costs. There's overhead associated with coordination and with trying to deliver what we hope is a much more robust product. And so that's what we bring before you today, are the additional resources that we need in order to accomplish that. We are trying to do this also in partnership with the state's metropolitan planning organizations. That too has overhead associated with it as we reach out and try and work closely with CalCog and the MPOs.
Thank you. Ms. Nichols, we've spent a good deal of time talking about how we define disadvantaged communities and the screening methodology that's out there. But can you talk a little bit about how we define benefit to disadvantaged communities? How are we defining what constitutes a benefit?